attempts of ceasefire are not working because Russia does not want ceasefire and Russia does not want peace.
But originally India took the position that was seen by us as not that neutral. With all the military contracts with Russia, with the energy contracts with Russia, it was the certain, I can't say distrust, no, it was not a distrust, but a careful, like, with whom really India is. Is it really a neutrality that they announce?
Why do you think it's very obvious that most of the commentary that you hear, especially in this part of the world, is that I notice it often, and I've written about it, that Ukraine and Europe do not seem to have an agency, right? I mean, it's basically the fate of Ukraine is going to be decided by Trump and Putin, and frankly, nobody else matters. Of course.
So in the beginning, in 2014, it was a joke, like, two old men are speaking like, you know, I'm now afraid to speak Russian language. Why? Ukrainian nationalists will come and kill you? No, Putin will come and protect me.
We all understand that what President Trump really wants is a Nobel Peace Prize because President Obama had one. And I think he is kind of using the Russia-Ukraine war as an instrument. He sees this as his ticket to the Nobel Peace Prize, right?
Actually, the whole Kursk operation is important symbolically because we show for the whole world and for Russia that we can be very good in offensive. So we wanted to take the territory, we did it. We took Kursk, we can take also another territories. It's why Kursk operation matters and situation on the battlefield changed from time to time.
So we overestimated the Russian armed forces, especially in the beginning of the war. That was such a good domestic and external propaganda that Russia is the global power, but Russian GDP is the size of Italy.
समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं?
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले. दिस इज द राइट टाइम.
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया.
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉप अप करा ले. दिस इज द राइट टाइम.
आप समझा.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
3 years into the Russia-Ukraine war, there are more questions than answers. The end of the war remains uncertain, especially with the fast-moving and assertive Donald Trump making it clear that US policy under his leadership will be drastically different. While previously supporting Ukraine, Trump has now positioned himself somewhere between Russia and Ukraine, in fact, more towards Russia than towards Ukraine. And he has even been making concessions to Russia that were previously unimaginable in the European context. Now, this has definitely sparked a frenzy in Ukraine and Europe, along with a security modernization few could have predicted a few years ago. But what about Ukraine itself? In strategic discussions in this region, it's become common to overlook the agency of Ukraine and Europe when it comes to resolving the conflict. Recent developments show Trump engaging bilaterally with both President Putin and President Zelensky, with the balance of power heavily favoring Putin. How will Ukraine navigate this complex situation? How are Ukrainians coping after 3 years of a full-scale war? What is the level of societal cohesion in Ukraine? And what is the future for a war-torn country that has astonished the world with its resilience, military innovation, and the development of the strongest and most battle-hardened army in Europe? Ukraine today has debunked many myths about how modern wars are going to be fought. Today's episode of WorldView with Swasti seeks to give Ukraine the agency it deserves, exploring how Ukrainians plan to cope with the world's indifference, which has shown itself time and again. How do they remain resilient in the face of an exhausting war of attrition? I'm honored to welcome 3 distinguished Ukrainian experts, Dr. Svitlana Kovalchuk, the Executive Director of the Yalta European Strategy. For the past 8 years, she has been actively involved in international projects related to the Yes Forum and the Viktor Pinchuk Foundation, which raise global awareness about Ukraine and its security issues. My second guest today is Dr. Hanna Shelest, who is a Director of Security Studies and Global Outreach Programs at the Foreign Policy Council, Ukrainian Prism, and editor-in-chief at UA, which is Ukraine Analytica. Dr. Shelest also is a non-resident senior fellow at CEPA in Washington, D.C. And finally, I have Iryna Krasnoshtan, who is a program director of International Center for Ukrainian Victory. Iryna is an analyst and a foreign policy expert. She has extensive experience in security, defense matters, Ukraine's NATO membership bid, and transatlantic relations. She previously worked for the NATO representation to Ukraine, including 6 years as a political analyst. So with that introduction, let me dive straight into this very interesting conversation with the three Ukrainian experts. Let me start from you, Svitlana. You hold a PhD from the US, and the United States of America seems to have deserted Ukraine, isn't it, under Trump? What is the mood in Ukraine today after 3 years of war and putting just so much investment into what American support means for them?
Actually, now we have a little bit complicated time in Ukraine with American support, as everyone know, after especially meeting in Oval Office, military aid was frozen and delivery of satellite information was frozen, what was really awful in Ukraine. But still, we have a hope on that real negotiation will have a place and we will reach just and long-lasting peace, because just peace is not enough for us. What Ukraine needs, it's peace, but just and long-lasting.
And you have also, I mean, I'm just building on that. You've also been, organizing these massive international conferences. And I think one of the biggest melting pots for academics, for military personnel, for politicians from all over the world has been the Yalta European Strategy, frankly. How have you seen the mood shift in the many years that you've been conducting these big conferences?
So actually, Yalta European Strategy Conference is active in Ukraine for the last 20 years. It started in Crimea, and the main idea was to foster European integration of Ukraine and to bring best mind to Ukraine to discuss great ideas, global ideas in Ukraine, not only abroad. Since that, a lot of changes, of course, happened. Since the invasion in Crimea, we had to move to Kiev, and now our conference takes place in Kiev, but still with hope that at some time we will be back to Crimea. Of course, mood changes if we firstly discuss European integration of Ukraine, a global issue. Now, most important questions we are discussing is situation in Ukraine and what need to be done to reach a peace in Ukraine.
Yeah, and I think it is important at this point to know that, I mean, in my own discussions with Ukrainians over the years, I think the question, frankly, right now is not that of territory, because I think it's a done deal that Ukraine doesn't have the capabilities to take back its territory. So the question is not really that of territory right now. The question is that of capitulation and on Russia's terms, and I think that is what Ukraine is fighting. So I think we need to just put that into perspective. But Hanna, I was intrigued when I was going through your CV, and you have a PhD in mediation in military conflicts. So, frankly, what is happening in front of you is also a case study for your own work. Could you just tell me a little bit? I know Ukraine has a lot of hopes from India being the mediator and India's position in global affairs, its multi-alignment. But frankly, in my opinion, I see that the other countries like Qatar or United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia that have been doing the mediation game much more effectively. But what's your reading?
You know, it's always easier to study other conflicts than then work with your own conflict. And that is the situation in which I appeared back in 2014. Because let's be honest, the Russian-Ukrainian war didn't start in 2022, it started in 2014. And the first mediation efforts being at the Minsk process back then. So we started to analyze which countries can be involved. Originally French and Germany. The US and European Union withdrew from this process. Then we invited other countries like, look, if you can help, we will be glad. At least take one problem. In 2022, a lot of countries started to come with their peace initiatives. Some understood that they can be with the very limited topic. So they're not trying to solve the whole global problem. Qatar, even that they have mediation as their state strategy, they helped a lot of countries with this. But they said, we're a small country, but we can help with one issue. Return of the kidnapped Ukrainian kids. Because we have 20,000 of Ukrainian kids being kidnapped by Russian Federation. And they're very successful because they didn't put the global idea of solving all the problems. We can. Emirates said, okay, we have dialogue with top countries, let us help with one issue, that is the exchange of the prisoners of war. And they're calmly working with this. Saudi Arabia appeared to be like, because we have our position, we have the territory where you can have safe conversations. That's how negotiations started to be. So Saudi Arabia is not proposing what should be this peace. They are telling, we are facilitators. Take our territory, take our resources, feel safe here, we create conditions. But then there were countries like China who said, like, we would like to propose you, but what they presented, it was not a peace or mediation. It was more of the Chinese view, how they would like to see the world. That's not a mediation. Mediator doesn't have this position. Or South Africa, when they presented, not because they wanted peace in Ukraine, but because they had elections inside of the country at that time and because they wanted to demonstrate their leadership. The same for Brazil. With India, we appeared in the difficult situation. Why I went so in detail for this to understand how different countries perceived. Originally, Ukraine really wanted India to be involved. We talked about this because India is the nuclear power. India is the valuable member of the non-alignment movement. In the United Nations, their voice are heard. But originally, India took the position that was seen by us as not that neutral. With all the military contracts with Russia, with the energy contracts with Russia, it was the certain, I can't say distrust, no, it was not a distrust, but a careful, like, with whom really India is. Is it really a neutrality that they announced? So it took us a little bit of time, and during this time, other countries came with the proposals. So India couldn't tell how really they would like to help. So would you like to be with one small topic? Because we asked, speak about nuclear. India said, no, we would not. You could take this topic, and it would be a very important topic. Or talk about food security. But food security was taken by Turks, for example, the grain deal when they negotiated. But at the same time, India was not ready to come to be a global mediator, like the position that other countries were taking or proposing. This time was lost. And that's why now we are returning back. We are not speaking about India as the mediator anymore, but we speak now about India as the country with the huge experience with peacekeeping operations. You are in the three biggest peacekeepers. That's why now there are discussions, okay, if Russia would not allow European countries to send their peacekeepers, so India is the country that may be willing because they have experience, and that is very important. And it can be acceptable both for Ukraine and for Russia.
I'm glad you mentioned that because yes, there has been a shift in what role can India play, and I can tell you that I mean, in hindsight, I think it makes sense for India to be neutral in this war, so that when the right time comes, it can play a constructive role. And I think that suggestion is extremely important. But Iryna, if I come to you, there's just been a very famous phone call last night, right? The second one, which is between President Trump and President Zelensky. And that phone call came after an hour-long phone call between President Trump and President Putin. And whatever partial ceasefire was suggested by the two sides, we saw that breaking down merely 4 hours after all these big words were announced to the world, because there was, I think, a barrage of about Shahid drones attacking the Ukrainian energy facilities again, and I think that's been going on. Why do you think that these attempts at ceasefire are not working, and what will work?
Well, the attempts of ceasefire are not working because Russia does not want ceasefire and Russia does not want peace. I mean, they want to continue this war to continue. And actually about the both phone calls, it's also important to note that basically Russian side spoke to the American side. Before that, Ukrainian side spoke to American side. But some of the terms that Russia has issued, they were also basically, the very similar to the original demands that Russia put on the table. And they are kind of like, if you want these peace talks to continue, you have to surrender. But then again, this is not the negotiation. This is just the demand for Ukraine to capitulate. So in my opinion, Russia shows all the signals that it does not want to actually proceed with the ceasefire. And you have noted that there was an attack on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, on Ukrainian energy infrastructure, and basically this was exactly what was mentioned in that conversation, that Russia will stop doing that. And we have heard quite a number of times from President Trump that he sees from President Putin the willingness and readiness for peace. But we have seen the last weeks and the last months that Russia has been only sending more missiles, more drones on Ukraine. And this is not a sign of peace for us.
And you know, very interesting case, because just after definitely Russia was accused immediately that what you're doing, the Russian side issued the statement that to confirm that they, with the goodwill, their armed forces intercepted 7 of their Rowan drones, settled them down because they promised it to Mr. Trump. The only problem is that that night there were 146 drones plus 6 missiles. So when you're returning back your 7 drones and sending 146, not speaking that you sent all these drones after the conversation, so you had time to stop it, that for me a clear demonstration how they manipulate with the public opinion, especially how they manipulate now with their positions at the negotiation table. So in the conversation with Trump, they are saying one thing to calm him down, and then in reality on the ground, the situation unfortunately is very different from this.
And that brings me to asking you this question on why do you think it's very obvious that most of the commentary that you hear, especially in this part of the world, is that I notice it often, and I've written about it, that Ukraine and Europe do not seem to have an agency, right? I mean, it's basically the fate of Ukraine is going to be decided by Trump and Putin, and frankly, nobody else matters. Of course, Europeans have a very different view. In fact, Europeans today are living a kind of a transformative moment that they never anticipated, okay? And there are things that are going on in Europe which will change Europe forever. But talking about Ukraine, right? You are the ones that have lost the people, the land, I think critical infrastructure, children. How do you respond to this idea that Ukraine doesn't have an agency in the Russia-Ukraine war? I personally do not agree with it, but please help me understand, and maybe we can start from Svitlana.
So actually, yeah, we are losing our territories. We lost a lot of people. We are losing our infrastructure. Already, it seems to me we lost 30% of civil infrastructure in Ukraine. 60% of energy infrastructure is also destroyed in Ukraine, and around 5,000 hospitals, children gardens, schools are destroyed in Ukraine. So enemy are destroying actually our country, and we're doing our best to defend our country, and we are fighting for our country. And for everyone, it's clear that we are fighting not only for Ukraine, but we're fighting for the whole democratic and civilized world. It's a complicated fight, but we are on it. And of course, you mentioned that everything is defined by USA and Russia, but it's not true, because if we, for example, after this very famous call in Oval Office, we saw that all Europeans met in London and they discussed what to do. And we are very grateful for European country for their support. We are very grateful also for leading role of Great Britain. And now our presidents in visiting different countries and discussing what to do. And also after that call, we saw that the European initiative Rearm Europe, European Union increased budget for defense. And it seems to me yesterday or day before yesterday, Germany passed the big changes in the law, so they will use more than 400 billion euro for the defense. So Europe has a role, play a role, and Ukraine as well.
But you know, this agency, it is the issue that was part of the propaganda since 2014. At that time, it was called that Ukraine is a failed state. That was the message of the Russian diplomats all around the world, because they needed to break support to Ukraine. Like, why do you care about this country? Why you need to support it? It's just a failed state. What was definitely not true even at that time, but that was quite a well sketched propaganda at that time. So that's why now it's also easier for them, because they can present it that they are not trying to conquer Ukraine, but it is because American puppets. It works because in the global south there are so many of the anti-American moods. So they just wanted to unite this idea of the absence of agency with anti-American moods, so to break support from the other countries to Ukraine, because Ukraine is saying it is anti-colonial war, when Russians are saying, oh, no, that is Americans who would like them to fight. If we would be American puppets, Americans would provide us with weapons from day one or boots on the ground to help us, not of what we have on the ground. And also, I think that Ukraine, with these 3 years of the war, definitely proved our agency, how we developed our military industry, how our soldiers are defending the land, that Russia didn't manage to occupy any of the big cities.
In fact, I would like to just ask you as a question that, of course, I mean, we are here discussing the question of agency, etc. But in the last 3 years, and most of Indian military analysts, like the professional circles, have taken note of the fact that today Ukraine is Europe's most formidable army, Europe's most battle-tested army. And the military-industrial complex and the capacity that you have, I mean, I know some data that was shared by your president, which said that today, even though Ukraine is dependent on America for 30% of extremely important weapons like air defenses and intelligence, 30% of its weapons are coming from Europe, but 40% of weapons you're making from your defense industry. Now, for a country at war, how are you managing that? Hanna, would you like to tell us?
2 reasons for this. First, Ukraine used to be the 10th biggest exporter of weapons before, let's say before 2005. And because of this, we had all the engineers development, all of these were there. But we had high corruption in this sphere, and we had absence of money in this sphere. When the war started, first of all, people became intolerant to the corruption in the military sphere. Yes, the cases are happening, but they are fought. So that's what is important. The second is a lot of money came, a lot of domestic money plus a lot of foreign money, like Danish model when foreign government is paying to help us. And it became less bureaucracy and regulations when the government encouraged the startups to deliver what they have and quickly to test it on the battlefield. Because in the military industry, usually it is very difficult. You have all these bureaucracy circle of testing and everything. Now, you can have 1 month from the bureau to the battlefield for the drone, then returning back with the commands, how it was, and then returning back again, and then scaling this production. So war de facto made our military industry to remember everything what they had, to bring the specialists, especially IT specialists, a lot of them are now working in the military industry, because they feel the purpose. They have money, what is important, they have a lot of partnerships, and they understand that they can test what they're doing. And I hope that it will develop further, because now a lot of countries would like to buy it. We have the limits, like there are restrictions, we cannot sell Ukrainian weapons now, but I hope that in the near months, because it is already a discussion in the parliament, we would allow selling. Why? Because that would allow companies to produce more, so it would be cheaper, and they would be able to invest more money in their development.
So frankly, I'm of the opinion that if Europe indeed makes a shift away from US dependency, I think Europe is very serious about that. This is not to say that the transatlantic alliance is destroyed, but that Europe also needs to build resilience, right? And I think in that situation, Ukraine is going to be playing a huge role, because I've heard it from every single European leader that I've spoken to in the last few days, including the Ukrainians. But since we are talking about parliament, we are talking about how you've been fighting corruption, etc. Iryna, help me understand. Mr. Putin does not like Mr. Zelensky. He said that Mr. Zelensky has to go because he is an illegal representative. He is not a legal leader, not a legal president. Why does he say that? We know there's martial law in Ukraine, but that's very obvious, isn't it? Why do you think this propaganda is so popular?
Yes, first of all, as you mentioned, there is martial law, there is Ukrainian constitution, and we cannot hold the elections during wartime. Therefore, President Zelensky continues to be legitimate president of Ukraine. But what worries me a lot is not only that Putin has been, making these comments, but President Trump has been for some time making similar comments, which are very much in line with the Russian, narrative. And when it comes from the President of the United States, this idea that President Zelensky is illegitimate, and then he provides some sort of ratings that we have no idea where they are coming from, because just to give some understanding that, President Zelensky's ratings have never dropped significantly. His support, of course, during the election time, he was supported by more than 70% of people, and during all this time of the full-scale war, his ratings have been always more than 50%. And recently, after that conversation that he had in the Oval Office, his ratings went up quite a lot as well. So they are now at 67% of approval ratings. So where this is coming from? Well, President of Russia, or dictator of Russia, if I would be sincere in my opinion, because actually it's worth asking, what about legitimacy of President Putin? Because has he held any elections that would be recognized by international standards? That's a separate issue. But coming back to Ukrainian president, Putin wants to destabilize internal situation in Ukraine. And the elections is a sensitive topic with which you can manipulate. And then basically what Putin wants to achieve is to make sure that if Ukraine is pushed into elections, then there are a lot of processes that would need to go on. And then there is a lot of possibilities for Russia to exercise all sorts of hybrid means and influences over Ukraine. So that's the biggest and most important worry. And in Ukraine, we have had like dozens or even hundreds of Ukrainian civil society organizations that issued a statement and explaining quite in detail why the elections cannot happen during the wartime, first of all. And then we also go on into explaining, because my organization was one of the co-signatories, and we also explain what is needed for the election process to then prepare, because it is important to underline that elections are not just about the election days. It's about preparation. It's allowing freely, for the candidates to run, and all other things that are important.
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the things on which we have a fairly divided opinion in India is that why is it taking so many years for world's number 2 military superpower, which is Russia, to actually defeat a much, I would say, weaker, asymmetric in terms of capabilities adversary here in Ukraine? And why does Russia need to resort to any hybrid threats and this and that when it can, in fact, just unleash like a proper military offensive? Why do you think Russia is not really launching a military offensive? I'm waiting for Russia to launching a military offensive, and I've not seen it happening.
No, they launched. The problem is differently, that we overestimated the Russian armed forces, especially in the beginning of the war. Mm-hmm. That was such a good domestic and external propaganda that Russia is the global power, but Russian GDP is the size of Italy. A Russian population is not so big, 130 million. One of the biggest, but let's say not so big as their territory. And it was the huge corruption in the Russian armed forces. So when the war started, most of the equipment was not working. There were plenty of the military observers who just demonstrated because of the bad maintenance, because they sell all their fuel, for example, to the black market or something like this. But even more, it was the huge underestimation of the Russian forces. They didn't brought food with them at the first weeks of war, but they brought their parade costumes because somebody told them that Ukrainians are going to welcome them. So this underestimation of the enemy really played badly with them. But the most important issue, I believe, was that Russian armed forces couldn't understand why they need to fight Ukraine. Originally, all the prisoners of war that we were taking, when you asked, they even couldn't understand where they are, why they are sent, but saying only President Putin said, probably he knows. So it is this level of the trust to the leader that they were not questioning. It is not the critical thinking, no democracy inside. When Ukrainians really had motivation, they understood They knew why they are fighting, because we are defending our land. That's why you have a total society support inside of Ukraine. You have volunteers, you have charity, you had just women cooking to the soldiers staying at the checkpoint, for example, greeting. You had all these partisans and resistance movement, because for people, they were defending their land. And this question of motivation, I discuss a lot with the military from the different countries, with the generals who commanded the forces in different countries around the globe, and they said, like, we always struggle to explain to our politicians why motivation is so important for the soldiers, because that is something ephemerical. And now your war is the clear demonstration for us. One, the big country can lose when they don't have real motivation, and why a smaller country can win because they really could explain to the population why they need to do it.
Yeah, I understand that, Hannah. Well, motivation is one factor that we have tried to study too. And in fact, I know one of my colleagues earlier at the Ministry of Defense think tank where I worked actually wrote a paper that said one of the reasons for Ukraine's success, in terms of resilience, has been the communitization of war efforts, and he was a retired armed forces. So in the professional circles, of course, we study the military strategy very closely. But Svetlana, Ukraine's strategic objectives could not really be met in Kursk, right? I mean, Ukraine is on the verge of sort of coming back from Kursk. What is really happening? Because on the battlefront, we see that, okay, there has been tactical gains and losses for both sides. It's pretty much stalemated. But in Kursk, there has been a setback. Do you think it's a setback? What is it? Because, of course, in my opinion, it was not able to meet its strategic objectives because it was supposed to be a bargaining chip.
Actually, the whole Kursk operation is important symbolically because we show for the whole world and for Russia that we can be very good in offensive. So we wanted to take the territory, we did it. We took Kursk, we can take also another territories. It's why Kursk operation matters and the situation on the battlefield changed from time to time. So for us, important that we show, and if necessary, we can go further on the Russian territory. And as we all see from the last call between Donald Trump and Putin, what Putin wanted, he wanted to stop attack of Russian energy infrastructure. We are active, we can reach our goals, and they are afraid of us. It's what we shown with Kursk.
And if I may just add, because Kursk is related also to your previous question about, the great Russian army, because for me, what is the most important for your country in general is to protect your own land. So basically, Kursk showed that Russia doesn't care about its own land and its own people. So it has put all the forces to fight in Ukraine to get our territory and kill our people. And at the same time, they did not care that our forces has entered on the Russian territory. And the second important point about the weaknesses of Russian army is that they needed reinforcement, which they got from North Korea, to protect their own land. I think it speaks quite a volume, and I also will disagree slightly about whether the objectives were met or not, because I think it underlined the profound weaknesses in the Russian army.
No, I'm glad you brought out that perspective because, of course, Iryna, we are from a very distant theater. It's a different theater. Of course, you know that India has historic relations with first Soviet Union and then Russia. And we also discussed why the reasons are like that. But despite that, of course, we are trying to make sense of this war, which has pretty much changed everything we knew about how wars are going to be fought. But let me on this note sort of change the tone of the discussion a little bit and ask you something which is more personal, which is that as far as I know, so many Ukrainians I know, they speak Russian, they have families in Russia on the other side of the border. There are families where cousins live on one side and the other cousins live on the other side. I mean, how has that been? Has that been a massive personal cost for all of you to pay? What is it? Anybody can come. Svetlana, would you like to come first?
Yes, so war really changed the relationship between relatives, friends, because historically we had very close connection with Russian. Since the Soviet Union, a lot of Ukrainians got education in Russian. It was like usual, and they stayed to live over there. For example, sister of my mother lived in Dagestan. And when war started, she called my mother and told Nadia, don't worry, we will come, we will denazify you, finally you will become real democratic country. After that call, we haven't spoke with the family of sister of my mother.
But you know, here is a very important issue. This conflict is not the ethnic one. We have plenty of the Russians who are living. My godfather is the Russian. He is now speaking Ukrainian language as the protest. We have the Russian battalions fighting. We have plenty of Azov soldiers who are speaking Russian language or something. Or ethnic Russian, Ukrainian, Albanian, Bulgarian, Moldovan, Georgian, they're fighting. I mean, because they're citizens of Ukraine. They share the values of Ukraine. And then we have the Russian generals who was born in Ukraine, or Russian pilots. There were several cases when the pilot bombed the home house of his grandma, the village over there. He knew he was born there, he spent his summers there, but he's ethnic Ukrainian, but he made this choice. He properly know what he's doing, because that is ideological, that is existential much more than it is anything. With the language, you in India understand it better than anybody else. All of you can speak English because it was the British Empire. Any of you became British because of this, or even more English? No, you even don't think about this. But we speak Russian because Russian Empire prohibited Ukrainian language. And it became the language of the empire. But it doesn't make us not Ukrainian, but Russian. So in my city of 1 million, when I was a kid, we didn't have Ukrainian school. I couldn't learn. It was the Soviet Union. It was the rules like this. So we should not mix the colonial past with the attitudes to the present. And that's what Russia is trying to do. That's how they're portraying that they need to protect the Russian speakers. In Odessa, in my city, we even have a joke, because we are probably one of the most Russian speakers, unfortunately, as the imperial city. So in the beginning, in 2014, it was the joke, like two old men are speaking like, you know, I'm now afraid to speak Russian language. Why? Ukrainian nationalists will come and kill you? No, Putin will come and protect me.
Okay.
But what about, yes, Iryna, yes, your experience?
That's very true. I will just comment on this point, because actually, if you look on the map of Ukraine, what regions suffered the most and what regions have been destroyed the most, it's the regions where the majority of population spoke Russian language. So again, Russia has created the myth that they come to protect, you know, some sort of minorities or Russian speakers, but in fact, they came to kill these people and to destroy their homes, which is quite you know, tragic. And on the you know, personal stories, for me, I think one of the turning points was 2014 and the occupation of Crimea, and I lost contacts with some of the people since then. And yeah, because I think this was one of the big turning points. Was for some people it was maybe 2022, but for many of us it was 2014 when Russia occupied Crimea. And just in general, I will also say, if we are sharing personal stories, I mean, I researched my family history and I found out that, you know, generations and generations in my family suffered because of Russia. I mean, that time it was Soviet Russia and Stalin's policies, and my family was executed. Some of the members, because obviously I'm alive, so some of the members survived, but my close relatives were executed by Russia. Parents, the mother of my grandfather died from famine, artificial famine, which was orchestrated by Stalin and his policies. So yeah, we have generations of Ukrainians who have suffered from Russia, and why Svitlana mentioned about long-lasting, you know, peace that we are looking for. We don't want just a quick deal, you know, to close it and forget it. We want to know that the generations that will come after us, the kids, our kids, the next generations, they will not have to fight the same war.
No, I'm glad you mentioned that point, Iryna, because, well, we all understand that what President Trump really wants is a Nobel Peace Prize, because President Obama had one. And I think he is kind of using the Russia-Ukraine war as an instrument. He sees this as his ticket to the Nobel Peace Prize, right? Of course, we all know that a short-term ceasefire won't work. Many ceasefires have been brought in between 2014 and 2022, and they've been broken down more than 20 times or 25 times. So I think there is a lot of logic and reason and rationality when you say that you want a lasting peace. But I just want to pick your brains a little bit on how do you think a realistic, lasting peace can be brought? Hanna?
You know, if to be very cynical, I would say that without the huge changes inside of Russia, we would not have a long-lasting peace. Because without the democratic changes inside of the Russian Federation, without the Russian defeat, that would be very difficult. That's history of Russia demonstrated us. They changed only after the certain defeats, and also because only democracy can value other democracies and other nationhoods and countries. The more authoritarian is Russia, the more difficult it would be for them to accept that other countries around them have the right for their existence beyond their sphere of influence. That's why I understand how can be the certain small things done. It can be peacekeepers, it can be some observers, it can be sanctions from the US, other ways. But if we speak about the real long term, that should be the changes inside mentality.
Svetlana?
I
What
would
do you
say
think?
that we need real security guarantees to reach a long-lasting.
But with NATO's Article 5 not being on the table, what do you think is a security guarantee that will work?
Now, my president, my government are working with international partners on real security guarantees, and I think that in nearest future we will have more information about this.
Iryna, what do you think in your opinion?
Yeah, just we have seen some signals coming from UK government. They are working quite hard. There were quite a number of meetings, and they're working on this coalition who would be hopefully able to come into Ukraine to be the guarantors and peacekeepers. And important point that Hanna partially mentioned is accountability and justice, because I think that if we don't bring justice to the victims of the aggression, we cannot say that we have reached the real peace. And I'm quite concerned that with this attempt to find a very quick solution, and we see that President Trump is contemplating some sort of fast normalization of relations with Russia. I'm here just to reinforce the point that Hanna made. Basically, if you don't make Russia understand that what they have committed was a crime, it's very difficult to not expect that the aggression will not happen again.
So talking about security guarantees, Ukraine did have security guarantees in the form of nuclear weapons. And these nuclear weapons you returned to Russia because the Russians and the Americans gave you guarantees that in that exchange, they will protect your territorial sovereignty and integrity. Where is the discussion now?
That's why Ukraine now is speaking about the real security guarantees, because in 1994, Ukraine rejected the third biggest nuclear arsenal in the world. And what even more interesting, that all of these nuclear weapons moved to Russia, and now they're using these missiles that can be both for nuclear and non-nuclear. They are already sending them to Ukraine, but just to target civilian objects. The airplanes that we returned them, because they were for these nuclear weapons, they are using now in the war against Ukraine. A lot of discussions in Ukraine, should we return nuclear weapons or not? But Ukrainians are insisting that we are very responsible in terms of nuclear non-proliferation. We made this decision in 1994. The countries promised never attack us and never to question our territorial integrity. United States, United Kingdom, Russia, France, and China signed this document. But as you see, because it was memorandum, nobody really took responsibilities. That's why one day they just said, oh, there are no guarantees. And that's why new agreements that Ukraine signed now, 28 security agreements, we already look to them differently. We are asking them, we don't want the repetition of that. Because now the country to which we gave it, the nuclear power, the United Nations permanent member of the Security Council, is the country who is jeopardizing the nuclear non-proliferation regime. And it is important not only for Ukraine, but that gives the possibility for Iran to say, why should we reject? Look to the Ukrainian example. North Korea, many other countries who now started speaking about getting nuclear weapons. And I hope that all of us, and that's why we wanted more Indian involvement in this way as well, because as a responsible nuclear power, your voice is important in this dialogue.
Well, yeah, the situation is far more complicated than what meets the eye. And I myself have argued that had only the real agencies been with the US and Russia, the war would have ended by now, isn't it? So there certainly is more than what meets the eye, and we will see how it unfolds. Of course, we in India would also want the war to end ASAP. That brings me to the question of India, because I've myself argued that Ukraine war has been an enabler of conversations that did not exist between our countries, the theaters, etc. And I do see that today in India, there's far better understanding of the complexity of your theater and the war that is being fought, about the complex identity, etc. And there's also curiosity to know more about Ukraine. And I also presume that similar thing exists on your part. But Hanna, tell me a little bit about how have you been viewing India, India's soft power? How do Ukrainians look at India?
What I noticed previously, you said like India had good relations with Russia because it is from the Soviet Union and so on. And it struck me because Ukraine also was part of the Soviet Union. And a lot of the good things that Soviet Union brought here to India was brought by Ukrainians. Mm-hmm. A lot of your metallurgical enterprises was built by the Ukrainian engineers from Ivano-Frankivsk. Mm-hmm. So Russia de facto monopolized the discourse of the Soviet Union when it's not only them, it was 15 countries inside. Mm-hmm. And Ukraine and India shared a lot since then time. For example, in Odessa, we had General Consulate of India. That doesn't exist the last 30 years. But that demonstrated the level of the interest India at that time had in Ukraine and in our ports and shipping and everything. So we really lost a lot of years. You're absolutely right. We didn't have any visit from the Indian Prime Minister for the 35 years or something like this. Indira Gandhi was the last one in the mid of the 1980s. And this August, we finally had Prime Minister Modi. That was a huge step forward. And from the Ukrainian side, you see now the ministers are coming, foreign affairs, you see the experts are coming. So the dialogue started at the different level. The business is separate, they are coming. And Ukraine just opened the general consulate in Mumbai yesterday. So what we have cultural interest. We started translating each other. We started looking for the museums, how we can work there, exhibitions, music. Indian movies are shot in Ukraine. One of that received Oscar a few years ago, KKK. So that was that's a clear demonstration that our interest and opportunities are much wider than what we really utilize. And it's not only war. That's many of the other reasons. Ukraine now looking wider. India is one of the priorities for the government, for civil society, for the cultural institutions like Ukrainian Institute. Mm-hmm. And I hope that this interest from Ukraine now will be welcome from the Indian side, and that we can see not only you visiting forums, but we will see more of the Indian experts coming, Indian cultural people coming. And let's not forget that each year we had 17,000 of Indian students in Ukraine. So Ukraine is really waiting when they can return back to Ukraine, because that was the best context that we always established for the long-term partnership.
That was beautifully said. What about your thoughts, Svitlana, on what Ukraine thinks about India? And if you would like to say something to the Indians through this platform.
I would like only to say that now more Ukrainians are aware about Indian people are very much welcome to Ukraine, and we hope that we all together will work on proper peaceful future.
Iryna, would you like to say something to Indians? Anything that you would like to share as a concluding remark?
This is my first visit to India. I was here, of course, also for the Raisina dialogue, and I have felt with my own experience what you said, that the interest to Ukraine is growing. I have had a lot of meetings and interactions, and I think I appreciated a lot that this was a conversations where I could share more about Ukraine, and I could hear more about, Indian Ukrainian position and perspectives and so on. And we had also yesterday at Raizina at the end a fantastic cultural experience as well. And I think that yes, a lot of Ukrainians, they also have appreciation to the culture, to the cuisine and so on. And I'm happy that the relationship between the countries is developing. We have seen number of good signs, and I just hope that Indians would also see more about Ukraine, maybe research a little bit more. I mean, hopefully times will allow to come and visit Ukraine. It's also a beautiful country, and yes, I have seen this with my own eyes now.
Thank you. That, you would agree, was a very different, remarkable, I would say also emotionally, I would say, very stimulating discussion on a war of grinding attrition. And Dr. Svitlana Kovalchuk, Dr. Hanna Shelest, and Iryna Krasnoshtan, thank you so much for joining us today on The Worldview with Swasti.
Thank you.